we'll kick it off.
Well, I went ahead and have it starting right now. I can cancel it if you like.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Um,
All right, you are live, so you can start whenever you like.
Thanks. And then we're hoping Ryan Copeland will join us as well. But we'll start with what we've got.
Awesome. So I guess we're good to go. Welcome, Captain Jen. And this is the third meeting of the Annapolis Small Business Maritime Work Group. And I guess I know we've done it before and everybody probably knows everybody else, but maybe we should just do for the any listening audience introductions just once again. I'll just kick it off. Steve Rice, Economic Development Manager for the City of Annapolis. And oh, Eric is going to join us. Awesome. Hope you want to go next.
Hi, I'm Hope Stewart, Small Minority Business Liaison with the City of Annapolis. Eric, I'll hand it off to you.
Hey everyone, Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the city.
Mike.
Mike Tomasini, owner-operator Pirate Adventures on the Chesapeake in Eastport.
Sean.
Owner of Chronic Sailing out of Port Annapolis Marina.
Seth.
Hey, Seth Lehner. I have a residence here in town and also affiliated with Warren Point Harbor Marina.
And Captain K.
Yeah, I'm Jen with the schooner Woodwind.
So it looks like Lisa Minker is having some trouble logging in. So we may not be with her expertise this evening. You know what, Hope, I'm going to try to help her if that's okay.
I had trouble as well. I went through the link that Mark sent in a separate message, I think, but rather than the invite, the calendar invite. So I'm not sure.
I think there might be two links. So give me a second. Hope you could continue with the meeting. I know that Seth has some information and a presentation he'd like to make.
Yeah, so we're going to bring up Seth's presentation as a follow-up to what he presented to us last week. But I think I just want to remind you all, we have an hour here to discuss, but that the purpose of this small maritime business work group is to discuss O2521 and specifically its impacts on small maritime operations in Annapolis. So the recommendations we're looking for you all is advice on how this bill has impacted your operations and any changes that we need to make. What we are not doing right now is making zoning recommendations, but maybe an overarching, recommendation to look into it. But that's how we want to focus our discussion tonight. But Seth, I will hand it over to you, and I know that Mark has your presentation.
Thanks, Hope. One quick question before we go on that. Remember in your initial email out, you sent to us a link for the zoning map itself?
Correct, yes.
Does Mark also have a way of showing that?
Mark, do you have a way to get onto the city's website and show the planning and zoning, the zoning maps?
I could do that.
Okay.
Too.
That's all right. I don't know how, obviously I don't know how to do it, but maybe that would be a quick starting reference point because a lot of my notes that would sort of, I think that'll go well with if we can have a reference to that.
Okay.
If possible.
I can access that. Let me give me a second.
Do you recall the one I'm referring to? It had the different shades and then the two or three zones were.
Yeah, it's our zoning map where it will show like
okay.
WME, WMI.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So, are you all seeing my screen?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
we
great.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
So this is just showing the maritime zoning districts. I could turn on the rest of the zones if needed, but and it's also showing the parcel lines. I can zoom in to wherever. You can see the legend on the left here.
So Eric, if you don't mind, so then the WME is the lighter blue, right? The bright pink is WMM, I think. To where the Tecumseh is written.
Yeah, this is the
Yeah, as I recall.
WMM, and then
Yep.
the light blue is the WME. So there's 3 different areas that are the WME, and then purple here is the WMI, and then the blue is the WMC, city dock area.
Okay. Okay, got it. Maybe if is there a way for you to just sort of leave that sit while we go through I don't know how it works
Sure.
exactly. Well, yeah, just kind of let that sit and then we can bring up the PowerPoint.
No, you
Hope,
can't.
which I
You
sent
can't
to
do
you.
both.
Oh yeah, it's one at a time. Yeah, unfortunately, I can.
Oh, okay, well, just leave that in the background and we'll
Okay.
come back to it if when it might be appropriate. I think that would be great.
Okay, I'll keep it. Just
Sure.
tell me when to bring it back up. But
Yeah.
I'll stop
Yeah,
sharing.
I mean, just I think a visual might sort of aid our conversation, and
Yeah.
especially for a couple of lines that I have noted. And forgive me for looking this way; it's easier for me to see on my big monitor.
And just for clarification, sorry, I didn't notice this before when you shared it with us. And sorry about the barking dog. You have a WME work group on here, but it's not WME work group. It's a small maritime. So this is the work group for all maritime districts.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's just click right into that first page, or which there you go. Okay, so what I did was you might recall from the previous meeting we had, which I think is now a month ago, is that I did some work on identifying the significance of the existing trigger thresholds, and those are noted in the column, the left-hand column. So for example, I wrote existing benchmarks to expand the use. So that's inclusive of the current 2021 legislation, right? So the top being a 20,000 square foot working yard and a 30-ton boat lift. So recall that all of the properties zonings under WME, MMI, et cetera, have so much commercial space that has been allocated to use for various commercial purposes or endeavors, right? And in order to get a classification of a general commercial space that's beyond a maritime application, you have to start with meeting various thresholds. In the first group of those is noted as the city calls a trigger. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 benchmarks or triggers are the initial phase to expand a zoned parcel beyond a maritime related commercial activity. So the first of which, for example, is a 20,000 square foot working yard and a 30-ton boat lift. So I approached this, you might remember from our previous conversation that it looks like the city is very oriented towards square footage of a lot and a parcel rather, and then also how many square feet are under roof being used for specific commercial activity that's not open space or not open yard or not parking. So, of course, we can't get more dirt. So what that does is each individual parcel, if you don't even have X number of square feet to work with, you automatically cannot meet the trigger which the city has required to date. So for example, if your parcel is not, is 19,000 square feet, you automatically by default can't do anything with the first parcel. Okay. So on the right-hand column, after my study, I did a lot more work beyond last month. And I tried to identify parcels that are in fact fully working maritime related businesses in perhaps a multitude of scopes, but simply don't meet the size or square footage requirement to even get past the first threshold. So what I did is I then made a suggestion of, okay, well, if we bring down the square footage requirement, and in fact, we relabeled it from working yard to open space for commercial activity. In other words, working yard, I have in my head, I'm not really good necessarily with the encyclopedia or Wikipedia, but I have in my head that a working yard means that it's a place where you're doing rigging, et cetera, with a boat. But we all know that that's not necessarily the only thing that happens in open space on land next to water. So if we instead expanded that and allowed that a little bit more breadth and scope of what happens on open dirt, and we brought the size down to, or right sized it to what's really actually happening, then we could make some adjustments to allow those properties to actually meet the threshold of these various triggers. I'll walk them through you now, with you now. So for example, if we change 20,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet of open space with a 5-ton jib or mobile crane rated to hoist a 10,000 pound boat, to give you a quick reference point, a 30-ton lift is really big. That will handle a boat that's perhaps up to 60 feet, plus or minus, depending on the type of boat. It requires a lot of space just to maneuver a 30-ton lift. I mean, like a lot, okay? Whereas if we brought that down in scope and size, we could still have cranes and lifts for these yards, but right size them to the actual size of boat that would fit on that space. This particular note that I have here, if you page down a little further, you'll see a quick example of the size of a crane, which I'm suggesting would meet that requirement. Those cranes right there are the size that I note, a 10,000 pound crane, excuse me, a 5,000 or 8,000 pound crane, whatever I noted there, but rated to lift a heavier boat. And a quick reference point, Jen will agree. A 10,000 pound power boat is usually up to perhaps 30 or 32 feet long. It's a good sized boat. A sailboat might be length and might be comparable. So these are not necessarily small boats or small cranes or small anything. They're just, again, right sizing to reality. That yellow crane is pretty similar to what's at the Annapolis Yacht Club today. I don't know the rating at the Annapolis Yacht Club for those 2 or 3 that are there. We could double check that, but just dimensionally, that's the size. I included the other one with the humans in it just to give you a perspective on dimension. We can go back up to the previous slide again. The next thing is 25,000 square foot on land storage. I find that to be very similar to the first one. But I adjust the size of it, strictly calling it land storage. Again, I have in my head that the idea in 1987 was it was quite literally for boats on land, not necessarily having any work to them. Of note, 6,500 square feet is roughly very close to the square foot size of Mueller Marine on Eastern Avenue. The other one, Seashell Marina, has about that same size. Mueller and Alsop, by the way. They each have about 6,500 square feet, plus Seashell. So there's a third one. Obviously, there's several other properties that will meet that threshold. The third is the seafood processing. So here and hope we discussed this a couple times recently, just in the last couple hours too, is it's really hard to find, as we discussed previously, anything that's of that size that's in the seafood processing business today. In fact, I did quite a bit of searching on this and really found only possibly one. Well, I have found two seafood processors, one of which is on Bay Shore, as you all know, the Wild Country guy. I would call him processing only because he does bring in shellfish, regular fish. He cleans them, he sells them. I'm not in that business, but it looks like he's processing fish to me, along with crabs, oysters, etc. The size of that location is 1,600 square feet to go along with the right sizing of businesses. He seems to be doing well with it, and that's what we have today, and that's reality. The other one or two, Hope, are outside of the Maritime Zone properties. They're in the city. There's one on, was it Margaret Avenue off of Chinkopin? But frankly, nothing relevant to this conversation. There happens to be a seafood processing industrial association located in Annapolis called the Chesapeake Bay Seafood Industrial Association. They're off of Severn Avenue, off of 3rd Street, excuse me. And their office takes up a little less than 1,000 square feet. So this is what we have today is more association than less actual processing. My suggestion would be is that we use what we have as the benchmark reality, and then we beef that up a little bit. If we can add on something to do with additional elements of seafood, perhaps marketing, distribution, representation, sales, promotion, etc., then we have a little bit more there that we could grab a hold of and make that more substantial for the zone. Then that would be a trigger. The fourth one, boat or sailing club, I would add in the use or sort of way expand what we're going to define or acknowledge as a boating or sailing club. In 1987, there was no such thing as fractionally owning a boat. There was no such thing as a shared use of a boat. A membership of the boat itself didn't exist. Today, we have a lot of that. We have a lot more people using boats that are not owned by one individual. I think Jen probably sees a lot of that or hears a lot of that in her world too. This would include businesses like Jen's, okay? So we are renting a boat, we're using it for nonprofit, a membership, an hourly, a daily, et cetera. If we expand that well beyond strictly the two words sailing club or boat club, I think that will be a big benefit to these zones and to these parcels in the zones. So a fuel dock here again, reality will dictate that I don't see any individual really rushing to bring in any sort of diesel or gasoline fuel dock into the city of Annapolis. The environmental thresholds are so high, and the expense to invest in that sort of structure today is very high. I don't really think, I bet I don't even need to go beyond that in this panel. But it did occur to me that we have electric coming, and it's going to come in a wave, a big wave. We see a lot more interest in electric motors for power and sail. And I would suggest to the panel that if we're looking at something today and we really want to guide what's coming down the pike, that if we could give an incentive to these parcels to add in electric motor battery charging stations at their docks, piers, bulkheads, so that boat owners really do see something fresh coming along over the next decade, that will be a gigantic benefit to not only the city, but the boat owners, the marina operators, you name it. It's coming, whether it's definitely going to be a big piece of this puzzle over the next decade. So if we put it in here, I think you'll see a lot of marina operators very excited that if we could, hey, if I see an incentive to add this sort of thing to the property and I can get a benefit out of it on the other side, that would be big. I also added one additional thing that I thought would be of interest to the community, and that's clearly stating, look, if we can get sail and canvas work back into Eastport or keep it in Eastport or expand it Eastport, that might be something that would really be a benefit to everybody. The reality is sailing canvas takes up a lot of square footage, and on a square footage basis, it's a lot less expensive outside of Eastport. So you have individuals and companies that really look at, okay, how much does it cost me per foot to be in Eastport versus out on Bestgate, out on Edgewood Road, out in Edgewater, Deal, etc. If there's a way we can give the property stakeholder an incentive to somehow keep or gather more of that work here in the community, I think that's a real benefit. Let's go to the next slide. So that's all the initial triggers that are my recommendation, the photos of the cranes. The second piece of this puzzle is the access initiatives, and this is again what the city came up with for the property owner to be able to expand even further to the next set of percentage of general use for that individual property. Water taxi landing is the first example. And I'm suggesting we add in some very simple language that says, look, let's make it reasonably accessible water taxi landing at a pier, a dock, a bulkhead, a slip, etc. Strictly because, again, as a marina operator, you want to be able to say, look, if I'm reasonably providing that to the community, then I'd like the city to be able to reasonably say, yes, go forward. Second thing with the public water access. And the only thing that strikes me as a guy who happens to be sitting on the water right now at dusk, literally, as we're speaking, is that I think that it's reasonable for the marina stakeholder, the waterfront stakeholder, to be able to say, okay, we're gonna have this when the sun is up. Recreational water access, let's add in simple things like an accommodating a kayak, a canoe, or a like-kind personal watercraft. I'm not real sure what the city's intention was there as far as recreational water access goes. It wasn't really necessarily obvious to me. As an example, I don't necessarily want people swimming off of my docks. I don't think the city wants that. So that would be perhaps the community could clean up that as well. Crabbing and fishing, same thing. If we're doing a dawn to dusk, then, or 8 a.m. to dusk, then I think that most of the property stakeholders would say, yeah, you know what, that's a fairly reasonable thing. We can make accommodations to manage that. So that would get you through the access initiatives, category 1. Category 2 is the stiffest of all of them, right? And again, we're back to size and dimension of these parcels that are in that zoning map that we brought up initially. The first of which is so it speaks for itself. The 150 on-site parking spaces. Well, there's only so much dirt in Eastport. And I don't see anybody building any sort of multi-level parking platform for an automobile in Eastport. It's just not going to happen. The residents will absolutely explode with any of the suggestion of something like that. So my thought on that is, well, wait a minute. Why don't we go back to the incentive piece of this conversation? Let's give the community things that are coming down the pike. And something that the waterfront property owners can, we could see this happen. EV chargers is a real thing that's happening. We have several in the city today. Eric, I'm sure, knows every single one of them. But more will be needed. Maybe they aren't today, but they will be needed over the next several years. So my thought here is, instead of fussing over how many existing parking spaces there are today to meet this particular initiative, how about we tell the property owner, the parcel owner, that say, okay, well, you have X number of parking spaces. You go ahead and convert a percentage of those immediately. Okay. And we're going to allow this initiative to go through. And then over time, as long as you keep up the pace with the number of vehicles which are coming, then we're going to continue with this endeavor. And frankly, I think everybody wins in that sort of thing. We're not changing a darn thing other than allowing people to charge their cars. And I think that's probably going to be well received. A $200,000 payment for a street end park. I don't know. I did witness a lot of those meetings 3 years ago, and it all seemed like a completely random dollar amount. Don't have really any idea why it's that amount, but I do see on my chart that I did in the spreadsheet, which we'll see in a moment, that that's just a lot of money. No matter how you slice it, there's only so many stakeholders in the entire city that can actually afford that and justify it in order to add on 5 or 10% more general commercial space. It's simply too much money. And the way that I looked at that is, okay, well, what if we did instead? What if we altered that and adjusted that a little bit? What if we took the reality of how much that commercial space really generates for that property owner? And we said to that property owner, here's a gross dollar amount, which we're going to ask the property owner to pay into this fund. And we're going to benchmark it on your gross revenue or your gross receivables. And we're going to give that property owner a period of time by which to submit it into that fund. Frankly, I looked at my own books and I said, what can I justify? What can I reasonably afford? And then I looked at what I know of other property owners in the community. And I thought to myself, that feels about right. That's the 7.5% is something that I could generally absorb. It's still ends up being a hell of a lot of money, to be blunt, but it's something that at least I could figure into my own calculus and perhaps plan for that I could justify such a financial endeavor. Finally, the community boating facility. I think that if we, the whole idea of an outdoor facility is noted is in the notes. And I think that each of the properties could perhaps come up with something that would fit under this category. But again, if it's going to be driven by square footage, then it might end up just having to be that it's tremendously flexible to fall under this category. So I made some notes to that extent, and then I also added as long as we're able to ask the property owner or expect the property owner to plan a reasonable daily plan with management for what a community can use on that property, then I think that that's probably the way to approach that particular one.
Hi, Seth, and I just wanted to
Yep.
jump in. We'll give you about 5 more minutes to cover all of this because we do want to make sure that we have time for discussion
enough.
for everyone else. Okay.
Got it. And you're right. I don't want to take up the whole meeting by any stretch. My next slide is my notes on the restaurant use, which are exactly the same as the previous. I made no edits to this whatsoever. And that's my suggestion on something else that should be added in for the WME as a trigger strictly for talking about restaurant use. I could walk through that, but honestly, that hasn't changed at all. So perhaps we let that sit to the side for this moment. And the very final thing is the spreadsheet. Okay, so here what I did is I expanded. You might remember this from last month where it's very crude. But what I did do is I drilled more down on it because I was really sort of perplexed by, is this really what I'm discovering? And it is. I use the words, it only got worse for WME. Okay. And what I mean by that is the percentages of generally usable commercial space, which is what this entire conversation about is, how can a WME property expand the general use commercial space for each parcel? It only gets worse the more that I study it, because the other zone properties have such a tremendous volume of actual square footage, okay, and they're in the favorably zoned at WMM and WMI, okay. So how does that play out? If you look to the columns on the right, the red ones starting with column O, okay, is today under the current legislation 0-25-21, the WME properties, which could qualify under the existing legislation, represents 13.89% of the increasable space according to that legislation. So let me repeat that. If you have 1,000 square feet, which could be expanded under the legislation that was passed in 2021, only 130 feet of it is found in WME. That's concerning. So, whereas WMM receives nearly 50% and WMI nearly 37%. So the benefit is clearly to the property owners of those other zone properties. Okay, back up to the top if you don't mind. So what I am suggesting, again, only because we are in this formula that's driven by square footage and by square footage under roof. That's the formula the city is insisting that we play in. So I'm playing by that formula. I'm suggesting that the triggers, the first series, go for WME properties from 15% to 20%. I'm suggesting that the series of the next two initiatives allow that property to go from 5% to 15%. What happens if that's the case? Well, WME goes from 13.89% as available commercial space to be competitive in our marketplace to 24.3%. Now, in raw numbers, frankly, that's not a lot, but it is something. And it gives the WME property owner a slightly more balanced ability to market that commercial activity. Okay. It's not 50-50. I have a suspicion that the council won't have a stomach for that, but it is a reasonable approach to advancing what could be available to these WME stakeholders. And that's the sum of my study. I'll pause there, Hope, because that's quite a bit.
So a couple of quick things. First of all, thank you, Seth, for your work. I'm assuming that everyone was able to see the spreadsheet just fine. So we'll just go with that. I do want to approve the minutes from our last meeting. I'll entertain a quick motion to do so.
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, thank you, Captain. Jen, all those in favor, please signify by
Aye.
saying aye or raising your right hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? No? Okay, the ayes have it. I just wanted to do that formally. Forgot to do that at the beginning. I'm sure there are plenty of questions and or comments with regard to Seth's presentation. So if anyone would like to ask Seth a question or has a comment on his proposal, please do so.
It's really well done, Seth, and it's you're
Thank you.
making valid points. I think that some of the triggers or the incentives, I think, were designed around specific properties who were at the time pressing heavily for more flexibility. One of them being the city marina, who had something that the residents during the task force meeting really wanted, which was those additional parking spaces that they weren't allowing to be used for the public. There was, it's a 2-level deck, and one level of that parking facility was not being utilized and sat largely empty. So they thought, all right, the city marina would like to get some flexibility. What can they provide that the area residents might like to take some of the strain off of perceived parking pressure? Is, well, if you open up that bottom deck and public who are coming into Eastport can park in it, then yeah, you can have that incentive. I don't think it was designed as a, somebody else is going to convert their property to add a parking garage. It was more, there is a parking garage, it's underutilized, and if we can incentivize them to open up those spaces, then the community gets a benefit. So that's the one that, I think is really just largely designed around that one property.
That parking criteria or benchmark.
Yeah, the parking benchmark. And then yeah, I do think, the boating clubs, I think you're dead on there. Boating clubs, I think if you write it correctly, you're going to have to put some kind of membership size in it. So it's not just, oh, I'm George and I let people use my boat 3 days a week, and now that's a boating club, and we're giving away non-maritime square footage as a result. But like a legit, a Freedom Boat Club or a Sail Time, Power Time operation is a legitimate. I think that's a legitimate thing that's available to the public, and that's one that should be considered.
Thanks, Mike.
Any other reactions? Eric, it looks like you have something to say. No? Mum's the word.
You're a great moderator, Steve.
Thanks, Mike.
I don't really have anything to say. I just, I think it would be helpful, to the extent that with the time we have left to, I thought your presentation was really helpful, Seth. So I appreciate you putting it together. But knowing that, we're not necessarily going to come out of this meeting with like hard zoning recommendations, or that wasn't necessarily the intent of the working group, but more to kind of understand how businesses and property owners are impacted by the zoning changes that happened in 2021, or to the extent that you feel them at all. I think it might just be helpful to kind of, I feel like, Seth, you've made your point fairly clear, that you feel like to be more competitive, you need to have more flexibility. But I think it would just be helpful, I think, for everybody who's here to maybe speak to that a little bit more directly, to the extent you have any kind of anecdotal or, because that's the kind of stuff that I think will go a long way towards, giving the city council some understanding of what's really going on here,
Are you asking me to speak to that, or
anybody really? It would be beneficial to me. I'm not, because I'm more detached from the economic world that Stephen and Hope are, deal with day to day. I mean, vacancy issues, who's,
I think,
businesses
Eric,
are
I'll
moving
jump
into
in.
town, who's not,
Yeah.
who's choosing to locate elsewhere, I mean, that kind of stuff I think would be
Sure.
really.
I'm gonna just sort of speak from one perspective, and I'm gonna use Jen as my greatest example, okay? Because I like Jen.
Okay.
And yeah, but Jen actually, and Mike, frankly, on either side of me, they both have maritime related businesses, which are quite literally on the water, right? They make money on the water, period. Their customer has no idea the zoning of where their boats are kept. Okay. Now, why does that matter? Well, if I'm not mistaken, Mike keeps his boat in a WMM zone property, where his customers will walk down the road and hop on that boat and go for their ride in the Severn. And Jen keeps her boat on the other side of Spa Creek, which frankly, I don't even know the zoning of Pussers. But I guarantee it's not WME. So to use the example of anecdotally, what's occurring is the customer, the commercial endeavor, look, we're all trying to capture dollars as they come through here, whether it be through seafood, whether it be through people using their boats recreationally. The list is indefinite, right? But we're all trying to capture dollars for the benefit of individually and the city. That customer does not care and does not know the zoning of where they are going to spend their money. So in a very real way, to allow one parcel a benefit that his neighbor, direct neighbor, does not have is not reasonable. And I think you don't have to go beyond the individuals in this panel to speak to that as true. And and that's kind of my thought on that. I can also tell you that anecdotally, the people really like coming here, and they like eating here, and they like being here. They consider whether or not they want to travel outside of Annapolis on their boat is not even a big piece of the conversation any longer. They like coming here to be in Annapolis, and perhaps they'll, spend a few hours on their boat. Perhaps they'll take their boat out for a day or two. But frankly, Annapolis is the destination. So I really think it benefits all of us to try and serve that customer, especially the recreational boater, if nothing else, to the very best that we can. And putting any sort of handcuff on one property versus the other, when not once, I guarantee, I'll make a statement. I guarantee you not one of Jen customers over the last 20 years has ever walked on her boat and said, "Hey, what's the zoning of bussers?" So there you go. And Mike, I would guess the same of your customers.
My customers are super smart. They already know what the zoning is.
They already know
when they walk in the door.
And Sean, and by the way, I don't mean to cut you off by any stretch, but actually you're the best example of all of them, because your business could actually be literally harbored at any of these zoned properties. Does that make sense? So if that's the case, then why should any of those zoned properties have a disadvantage to capturing your business? That's not reasonable. Right?
Can I just make a clarification? So
Sure.
what that zoning change did wasn't restricting maritime uses. What they were trying to do was restrict professional office use that from coming into the maritime zoning district, so that the maritime uses would remain in that zoning district, and you would have less chances of, Bank of America coming in and renting the property, so that it takes away from someone having their maritime business in the maritime zoning district.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Yeah.
And also to restrict residential property value pressure, which would have literally made Jen's business and my business be operating out of some backwater marina in Edgewater, as opposed to on the harbor where those uses belong.
Correct. So I think that the intent when they were doing that was to say, okay, if you have these incentives, because you have so much space for these maritime uses, if you meet these incentives, we'll allow you to have some professional office there. But then those properties that don't meet those, they can't have a professional office. They have to keep it a maritime business at their facility. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Lisa, thank you for that. And if I may respond to that, the flip side of that is exactly true as well.
Yes.
Okay. And the flip side of that is what's actually the handcuffing piece of it. So we have on this panel 3 boat-related maritime uses. We do not have 30. We don't have 300. We have 3. So, and all 3 of these, frankly, I like all. If they're not at my marina, that means they're at someone else's. Okay, which causes this marina to now have to rent or lease or get a customer from some other scenario, some other commercial endeavor. Does that make sense? So here, another sort of anecdotally, the reason that I can go shopping at CVS is because they can't make and buy anything at CVS other than pharmaceuticals is because they can't make enough money just selling pharmaceuticals. They
Correct.
have to be able to sell a whole plethora of things, right? Same thing with any other commercial endeavor. We can't just, we only have one of Mike Tomasini's business in this community. We only have one of Jen's. We don't have tens or hundreds of them. So what happens is you end up competing for those 2 or 3 or 4 commercially viable maritime related businesses to be at the property. How do you compete? Well, you compete with price. How much does it cost to use the property? That's simple enough to figure out. If you can't get Jen, Mike, or Sean's business at your commercial maritime zone property, that means I got to find somebody else. Now, where are those customers? Well, it turns out they're beyond the Maritime Museum. Now, excuse me, maritime zoning. If I am handcuffed to go and get that customer outside of the maritime zoning and my immediate neighbor is not, automatic disadvantage.
So, Captain Jen,
That's the quandary. That's the quandary.
sorry, I was sorry to cut you off, Seth. I thought you were done. Captain Jen, Sean, do you agree that 02521's impact on small maritime operations is consistent with Seth's perspective?
If I can, what I think is Seth has some very valid points about making it fair across the board. Absolutely. Things should be fair. I really believe that. But we all have our reasons for having our business certain places. And I think Sean's probably a good example of, he was probably able, and I'm not sure, Sean, if you actually have an office at Port Annapolis, but if you have an office at Port Annapolis, you are lucky enough because the rent is so low because they need your business there.
There you go.
Correct. Yeah. And I would say if it wasn't as restricted, I may not even have that office open to not be able to afford it. It would possibly be filled by a non-maritime business. That said, Black Market Bakers right below us, non-maritime, is an absolute asset to our company. From catering perspective, we just get foot traffic that comes in that sees them and they see us. We get a lot of benefit from having the non-maritime service adjacent as well.
Well said, Sean. Well said. That's dead on.
So it sounds like there's a benefit to having maritime requirements, and the consensus is that there's also there also can be a benefit to non-maritime requirements, or yes, or to making other businesses, increasing accessibility for other types of businesses.
Or maybe, I don't want to put words in Sean's mouth, but just what I was understanding was that it would be businesses that bring in foot traffic, or
it's foot traffic, and also I would classify as like it's some sort of service that enhances their experience with our company, with Port Annapolis Marina in general, and then just with Annapolis, the city in general, having everything kind of close by available, but not swamped with, like you said, a Bank of America office or a H&R Block office is not necessarily beneficial. But if we've got something like Black Market Bakers that offers legit service to the guest, it's very beneficial to us.
That's really helpful to hear. I mean, I think one of the things in retrospect, when we were on the Maritime Task Force, I feel like there was a discussion about compatible uses that may not be maritime, but would be compatible with maritime uses. I'm not sure we talk so much about uses that actually enhance maritime use, that might make a maritime use more viable, or competitive in a location. So I think that's a pretty interesting insight.
And I think that Seth has really also talked about what he thought could be enhancements, like, charging for, EV electric motors and things like that. I mean, those are all enhancements. But I don't know, exactly how much, I just think it should be fair as well. Like, figure out what's fair all around so everybody is playing under the same rules.
Okay, so just to, I guess, reiterate what Eric Lashinsky touched on earlier, rules changes are not formally a part of our scope, but that's something that would be, I guess, worked out with the council ultimately. But obviously the impact of 02521 on the smaller maritime operations is within our scope. And I think that we have a good sense of at least the consensus of this group based upon the discussion and Seth's analysis and his recommendations.
Should I, Steve, do you want me to read back like what I get the gist of being the top recommendations or the top insights?
Sure.
And then people can add if I'm missing anything. Okay, so one is that we have to understand from this legislation that even though it was meant to benefit maritime zones, that in some ways it has, I guess, limited or handcuffed some zones. So what you all are asking is that we need to, or city council needs to take a look at what is fair all around for our maritime zones and maritime businesses. It's important to keep the zones because they provide benefits such as lower rent for businesses such as Sean Owen said, and that's the whole reason we have these zones in place. But we need to also consider, Eric mentioned compatible uses, but also enhancing uses that enhance the experiences of people coming into our zones and visiting our businesses. Does that summary sound accurate, or is there anything I'm missing?
Hope, can I just interject one thought too? Which
Yes, of course.
is I think also I don't know if there's a way, Eric and Lisa and Hope, if there's a way to actually hard fast make this suggestion to the council, but it sure does seem crazy that we go from 1987 to 2021 to now 2024 without any real catalyst that to look at changes, right, and upgrades and renew and sort of refresh. So I'm wondering if we should also put in a suggestion that these triggers, benchmarks, et cetera, the way this is all drafted, that it gets reviewed every 5, 7, 8 years.
I think that's actually in the code. I think the 5 year. Yeah, I think I'm almost certain that the ordinance that was passed in 21 set a 5-year window.
Okay, all right.
So,
that was
so
not obvious.
30 plus years without. I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. Good
Things
news.
changed a lot.
There's no reason to not be having this dialogue with reality. Just okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Also Hope, I think important, one of the things that you and Stephen are tasked with out of this ordinance is trying to develop a coherent report that goes to the planning commission so that they can make recommendations to the city council about it.
Right.
The important piece of that is for you guys to have a really clear and easy way to collect information from the maritime property owners. So whatever it is that you guys need to make that data collection easier and for people to report without feeling like it's some kind of burden, I think that's where we got to try and figure out a way to collect that information. Seth clearly has his finger on the pulse of everybody's square footage and lot sizes, and that's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work, Seth. And if we can get that kind of that kind of benchmark going where you guys are going to get some real information that we can use, then
Not a badge of honor I'm looking to wear, but nonetheless, yeah.
because it's, then it becomes less anecdotal and more data driven, and then you can make the real argument. This property this property is so small that it could never possibly feasibly get any kind of flexibility, and all they really want is to be able to rent 250 square foot to some
Carpenter.
compatible business. Right?
Okay, then I
So-
nominate one person to be a block captain for each zone. Mike, are you signing up for your zone? And
well, Seth's in my
everybody can
zone,
do the work
so
Seth did on the properties in their
Seth and
zone.
I are in the same zone.
Seth and,
We are,
oh
you're
yeah,
right.
you are. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. But hope that actually is kind of a novel idea to have a block cap. I like that idea. Zone
Yeah,
captain.
somebody who
A
knows
zone
the
captain.
zone. Yeah, a zone captain for each of.
Mike and Mike can be the captain. I'll be his lieutenant. How about that? There, you got your first captain and lieutenant.
Yeah.
And Jen, I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing something.
I hope
Don't
there's
worry,
no
Jennifer.
mutiny.
Your
Yeah,
zone
exactly.
isn't that hard.
All right, so I think we're in a good place. We're going to take this consensus and have a draft that will be circulated to the group before the report is finalized. But I think we have a sense of where you all are coming from, and enough that it can inform a report. We're also at the just about at the closing time. I do want to thank you all for your service and for your willingness to participate and provide input to the city of Annapolis. This is important work. It's not easy, and it can be pretty technical, and it can be pretty laborious. And that was well exemplified by Seth's yeoman's work with the spreadsheet and the PowerPoint presentation. But it is important. It's important to the maritime community, and ultimately it's important to the city. So the city is very interested in supporting maritime, but we're also very interested in making sure that we stay current and we evolve and we stay competitive. So we're doing our best to align all of those missions. So thank you all very much. Hope, did you have anything else for the group?
No, I just kind of wish this was like jury duty. You all served for a year and we're not going to call on you again for a while, but there's every chance that we will. So I'm sorry about that. But thank you so much. Eric, go
Thank
ahead.
you
Eric,
again,
looks
everybody.
like you have
Thank you.
something else to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that, and we should add this to the minutes, but the code does specify that every fourth year, the planning commission should, it says, commencing no later than December 31st, 2023, and no later than December 31st of every successive fourth year, the planning commission shall submit findings and recommendations to the Sea Council for changes to the table of uses and or standards applicable to the waterfront districts in order to preserve the maritime industry as a vibrant part of Annapolis's heritage as a contributor to the local economy. So
is that commission driven by a county council person? Or
no,
sorry,
that's
city
just
council person?
that's our city planning commission.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think we have to keep that on our radar, and just as staff, we assist them and get them the information they need. So
Cool.
yeah.
And is our
Excellent.
next step now, so after we, I'll pull together the recommendations, send them to you all for approval. And I believe the next step then is to present them to the Maritime Advisory Board. Is that correct, Mike? Is that Steve, Eric?
I believe so.
Okay.
And then I think from there it would go to the council or planning commission.
Okay.
Well, thank you all very much. It looks like we're over.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.